In this video, I'm going to show you how I fix the noises coming from the suspension on my car. Hi guys, my name is Victor and welcome to my DIY Time channel where I cover a lot of common issues for Toyota and Lexus cars. And if you have one of those, you may want to consider subscribing to my channel so you can learn a thing or two how to fix it yourself and save money while doing so. So what happened is my car started making those squeaky noises when applying the brakes or when going over the bumps. Here's an example of some of those noises. I'm not sure how well the microphone is going to pick up those sounds, but there were two different distinct noises. One was the squeaky noise and the other was the knocking sound. All of those sounds were coming from the front wheel on the driver's side of the car. I decided to remove the front wheel and inspect that area. I jacked up the car and placed it on a jack stand, and for extra safety I kept the floor jack under the car ready to engage, and I also placed the wheel under the vehicle in case both the floor jack and the jack stand fails. I visually inspected the suspension parts, but I couldn't find anything obviously wrong with them. I tried to move and shake some of the suspension parts, and that's when I noticed that the noises are most likely coming from the upper control arm or the ball joint. And even though I knew the approximate area, it was still difficult to pinpoint where exactly the noises were coming from. So I decided to disconnect the ball joint from the steering knuckle and examine the upper control arm. First, I placed the floor jack under the steering knuckle assembly to prevent it from falling down after disconnecting the upper control arm. Next, I removed the retaining clip for the castle nut and then removed the 17mm castle nut itself. I also used bungee cord to attach the top of the steering knuckle to the shock assembly to prevent it from falling forward after I disconnect the upper control arm. Next, I'm going to use this simple tool to separate the ball joint from the knuckle, and if you need to get one of those tools, I'm going to post a link in the description area below this video if you're interested. And the reason I'm using this separator tool is because you don't want to hit on the aluminum steering knuckle or the ball joint with a hammer, because this can cause some structural damage to those parts, which in turn will cause some other major problems. Using this tool is very simple and straightforward. You just place it between the top of the steering knuckle and the bottom of the ball joint, and then you tighten the screw on the other side of the tool to push the ball joint upward and out of the steering knuckle. Now that the upper control arm is separated from the knuckle, we can easily see where the noises are coming from. Looks like lubrication was already washed off on this side of the car, and the control arm was making those squeaky noises when traveling up and down when the car was going over the bumps. This would explain the squeaky sounds, but as I mentioned earlier, there were also knocking sounds coming from this side of the car. I tried to move and shake the control arm, and I noticed that one of the mounting bolts was loose and the control arm had a lot of play on the right side. To fix those two issues, I lubricated the rubber bushings for the control arm and I tightened the mounting bolts. Also right now, since you have such an easy and clear access to the upper control arm and the ball joint, it's a good idea to inspect them for any signs of excessive wear or damage and replace them if necessary. For the upper control arm bushings, I used silicone-based spray lubricant that is safe to be used with the rubber parts, and after that all of the squeaky noises went away and never came back. Next, I retightened those two upper control arm mounting bolts. To do that, first I'm going to loosen both of those bolts, and then I'm going to make sure that the control arm can move up and down freely. I'm using my set of gear wrenches here, and they work really great in tight places like this. We're not going to remove those two bolts entirely, we're just going to get them loose a little bit, because we're still going to need to put some load on the upper control arm in just a moment. Next, I reattach the bolt joint to the steering knuckle, and then I tighten the castle nut to the proper factory torque specifications. Also, don't forget to install the retaining pin for the castle nut. To give you a better understanding how it works, let's take a look at this other upper control arm that I removed from another vehicle. As you can see here, those two mounting bolts going through this tube in the middle of the arm, and when those bolts are tightened, this part in the middle doesn't move anymore. And now the travel of the upper control arm only happens because of this rubber bushing around this tube in the middle. As you can imagine, this rubber bushing is pretty flexible and it can allow quite a bit of travel for the upper control arm, but if the amount of travel is too much, this rubber bushing can still break or rip. For this reason, we want to tighten the upper control arm in such a way when this rubber bushing is placed in its resting position. And the best position for that is when the upper control arm is bearing the load of the car on the flat horizontal surface. In this position, the upper control arm didn't travel neither upwards or downwards, and the rubber bushing didn't have to flex at all. Depending on the car you're working on, you might be able to mount the wheel and then tighten those mounting bolts. But if the space is too tight, you can use a floor jack and place it under the steering knuckle assembly and lift the car off of the jack stands just a little bit. This way you're going to place the load of the car on the suspension and the upper control arm will get into its original working position. These steps could be very dangerous, so make sure to follow all of the safety rules. And now we just need to tighten those two mounting bolts to the proper factory torque specifications, but unfortunately I cannot get to them with the torque wrench, because in order to do that I would have to remove the entire shock assembly. As a workaround, you can just practice on a different bolt and get a really good feel how much force is required to reach that proper factory torque specification. And then use the same wrench and tighten those two mounting bolts using your best judgment. After all was done, I reassembled everything in a reverse order, and now my car is driving well without any suspension noises. I hope this video was helpful, and if so, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.